But not a single penny. No, I mean it, not a single penny. If Republican wins, inflation is going to get worse. It's that simple.
If Republicans win, inflation is going to get worse. Now, that might be true. Your political bias aside, when you make a comment like that, it's fair to dive into it. Like, let's look at the history of certain parties. Let's look at the current bills and laws and packages they're currently looking at. Hey, let's put our political bias aside and let's fairly dive into it. Let's fairly dive into the numbers. And fortunately for you, I spend all day on the internet and it gives me time to find such things. And I came across this, which I believe aged like milk. President Biden says fears of persistent inflation are unwarranted and that price increases will be temporary. And just so you know, this came out in July of 2021. Now, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but as you saw from these various graphs, it was the exact opposite. It was warranted and they were not temporary. This is almost giving us flashbacks of when they were trying to gaslight us about the word transitory. And they're like, no, don't worry. It's not going to be here. Like, seriously, it's crazy that you think that these numbers are going to be around at all. And this was July. And fast forward to now, we are at a 4-decade high level of inflation. Obviously, I'm about to play this, but the importance of it is this. Whenever you're looking at a midterm cycle or a presidential election cycle, whatever it is, basically, if we're in an even year, one of the best predictors of will the current power stay in power is what's going on in the market. Because people are saying, okay, if I like how things are, if there's money in my pocket, if there's food on my table, we like it. Why rock the ship? But on the flip side, if people don't have money in their pocket, if they're feeling a little bit more of that financial pressure or really any other pressure, they're like, hey, probably can't get worse. Let's see if we could change things up. So that's why it's important, because really the quality of the market, the quality of the economy is a phenomenal predictor of, is the current power going to stay in power, or is it going to be like the classic political pendulum and come back to the other side?
We also know that as our economy has come roaring back, we've seen some price increases. Some folks have raised worries that this could be a sign of persistent inflation, but that's not our view.
Well, your view's wrong.
And the data shows that
it did not
most
show
of the price
that.
increases we've seen were expected and are expected to be temporary. Reality is you can't flip the global economic light back on and not expect this to happen. As demand returns, there's going to be global supply chain challenges. We've seen that in semiconductors, which are used in automobiles. That global shortage has slowed vehicle production, creating a temporary spike in car prices.
Temporary.
That's a real challenge.
Real temporary.
My administration is doing everything we can to address it. But again, these disruptions are temporary. Lumber
Really
prices,
doubling down on
example,
that. Tripling down.
They spiked early in our recovery. But in recent weeks, they began to fall. They've fallen by more than 50%. In the hospitality industry, prices are returning to where they used to be. Economists call all these things transitory effects. And they account for about 60% of the price increases we've seen over the last few months. I want to be clear. My administration understands that if we were to ever experience unchecked inflation over the long term, that would pose a real challenge to our economy. So while we're confident that isn't what we're seeing today, we're going to remain vigilant about any response that is needed. As I made clear to Chairman Powell of the Federal Reserve when we met recently, the Fed is independent. It should take whatever steps it deems necessary to support a strong, durable economic.
So as I quote tweeted it, aged like milk. Obviously, inflation, as you can see, in all of these very dramatic increases was not transitory. It was not temporary. It was a very serious issue, and it makes you almost wondering, maybe we shouldn't have injected $8.9 trillion into the economy out of nowhere. Maybe that wasn't the proper course of action. But here we are. This is kind of, we're just reaping what we sowed. And don't worry, if you're feeling good or bad about it, at least we have politicians on both sides of the aisle who will continually gaslight us to make it feel like, hey, it's not their fault, it's the other person's fault. And as long as they didn't do that one thing, things would have been perfect. And that's just the current state of politics. Federal officials trade stock in companies their agencies oversee. So the Wall Street Journal just wrote up one of the most in-depth and scathing reports of our elected officials and their abuse of their positions. Thousands of officials across government's executive branch reported owning or trading stocks that stood to rise or fall with decisions their agencies made. That's kind of the definition of insider trading. More than 2.6 thousand officials at agencies from the Commerce Department to the Treasury Department during both Republican and Democratic administrations disclosed stock investments in companies while those same companies were lobbying their agencies for favorable policies. Once again, this is all politicians. This isn't on one side of the aisle or the other. This is Republicans. This is Democrats. This is people who were elected and took an oath to serve their constituents, abusing their position. That's insane, and there's thousands of them. A top official at the EPA reported purchases of oil and gas, which is just hilarious. An FDA improperly lit an official owned dozens of food and drug stocks in a non-buy list. The Defense Department, officially bought stock in a defense company 5 times before one new business from the Pentagon. So these people are on the committees, they're in the agencies that are going to directly benefit or be hurt by decisions, and they're wheeling and dealing them. It's just crazy. What I found hilarious right here, average percentage of officials invested in firms lobbying their agencies, the IRS was above average, and so was the SEC. Like, this is such a bad look. The IRS and the SEC was above average. So wild. This impacted the Federal Trade Commission, then Justice Department, EPA officials, the Defense Department, federal officials. They weren't just like buying the stocks at the right time. These fuckers were short selling and like swinging options like degenerates. For all I know, they're probably watching this video right now trying to know the next hottest pick. These are elected officials. When financial holdings caused a conflict, the agencies sometimes simply waived the rules. I just had to throw that in just, I guess, to needle you, my audience, my viewers, to be like, okay, well, maybe they do it, but then they get in trouble because it's something they shouldn't do. Literally, they're just waiving it. They're like, it's okay, John, just don't do that again. Like, this is so wild. If you want to read this in more detail, it really is a great write-up. Hats off to the Wall Street Journal. Here's the title: Federal officials trade stock in companies their agencies oversee. It's one of those things that if you don't laugh at it, you're going to scream, because this is the definition of corruption. And what blows my mind is that the SEC, Gary Gensler, he apparently finds the time to look at someone like Kim Kardashian talking about something with crypto when this is happening, when his own department is above average in their ownership of things that they're overseeing. What fucking backwards world do we live in that this is our reality? It's truly insane. It's truly disgusting.